Hiya folks. Well, this wasn't the plan at all today. I know it said it might be a bit showery, but I've arrived here, I've got set up. Luckily I managed to get set up and it started to rain, as you can probably see and hear. So, might as well do the introduction to this video while we're waiting for the rain to stop. So what's this one all about? This is about float ledgering. And when we talk about float ledgering, most of you will have seen these things. This is a Polaris float. There's also a Locslide float, and they both do the same thing. They're specialist floats for float ledgering. Basically, I'm on a piece of line. Let's assume that's the main line. When you put pressure on it, it holds the float in position. When you let the pressure go, the float drops down or up. So when you cast out, your ledger hits the bottom, this comes up to the top, pretty much lies over like that, and then you just tighten up on the reel a little bit and it'll sit just like that, to whatever level you've adjusted it to. Now, not everybody's going to have one of these floats, of course, and I'm not using one today. I only fish in a water which is probably 4 feet deep, maybe 5 feet, right out in the middle of nowhere out there. And you don't actually need to use any kind of specialist float whatsoever. I'm actually just using a normal Waggler at the moment. It's a 3.5 AAA Waggler, which I'll drag out in a second and show you. And basically you attach that to the line in the same way as usual, and then you tie on a feeder rig or a bomb rig. Same rig, but just whether you decide to clip on a feeder or a bomb. Okay, so here's the rig. That's the 3.5 AA float I was telling you about. I've got a reasonably thick insert in it. Mine are all interchangeable because they're homemade, as you know. You don't want a really thin tip on these things because generally you're going to be fishing in adverse conditions. A bit of wind, a bit of tow, so a really thin tip just wouldn't work too well. It would get pulled under. And I may even need to go to a thicker tip under harder conditions. Just held on in the usual way, and on this one I've actually got, as you can see, there's a line stop here. It's got a bit of muck on it, but there we go. And a Stotts shot. That's a number 4 Stotts. Now normally under there, if this is a Waggler, you'd have a bulk shot, which would be 3/4 of the carrying capacity of the float. But this is a kind of a hybrid method. Like I said, it's a float ledger. So we come down to the business end, and I've just put on there a running bomb, and just on a clip swivel so I can change it later, and that could actually end up being a feeder, but we'll come back to that as we need to. I've tied that onto a swiveled boom, and I've actually done a video recently on how to tie up these swiveled booms, so I'll put a link up above so you can have a look at that if you want to. And what that does, it acts as a anti-tangle mechanism because it holds the, there we go, it's a bit better, it holds everything away from the bomb or the feeder there, and it should actually be a little bit longer than whatever the bomb or the feeder comes down to. Mine's actually quite long. Doesn't really matter too much about that, but if you want to have a fairly short hook length, you might only want to make it, say, that long. That's entirely up to you. I've got a hook length on. This is 019, I think it's X-Age Shimano, and I'm using a B911 hook, which is a size 12, I do believe. And that's it. Now, when we cast out, obviously, if you're doing this with a Waggler, you'd put a plummet on and you'd plumb around the swim. You'd be looking for slopes and shelves and drop-offs and whatever. If you did that with the Polaris or the Locslide float, you can't really find it because, as I said, as you release pressure on this float, it flops over and you can't gauge the depth of any part of your swim. The beauty of this idea is that the bomb is actually, if you think about it, that's your plummet. You then have your float in the usual way and you plummet just as if it was a Waggler float. So you can overcast, you can bring it back in gradually, you can feel whether the bottom's hard or soft, you can feel for obstructions, you can feel for all these features like a shelf, and a shelf is always a good idea, and obviously you'll get the depth. So I'm just going to go and plumb the float up and see where we're at. And then when I've done that, I'll show you how to finally set up the remainder of the rig. Well, that was handy. Just as I said I was going to plumb up, the rain stopped and I managed to take the umbrella down. So what I've done, just to be able to show you on the camera down here, hopefully I'll be able to get a shot of this, but you could do with another cameraman at this point. I've actually put quite a thick tip in there now, so it's almost a straight through waggler. It's really only going to stay on there while I do the plumbing up, just to show you, and then I'm going to go back to that slightly thinner one. So I've set it to what I think is about the depth, and I've set it to that because I fished this swim before. Of course, what I said previously about looking for features holds true, especially if you're fishing in new water. But on this one, I know the bottom just shelves away like that. I think it's probably man-made from probably 50 odd years ago, but it's pretty much flat out. So I think I'm round about the right depth, but I'll cast in. And there we go. Yeah, as you can see, the float's sort of lying there. It's probably about 6 inches over depth from the bomb. But if I now put the rod in the water and just sink the line, always make sure you've got your rod tip under the water when you do this. That'll sink the line, and of course if it's a windy day it'll sink quickly. Today the wind seems to have dropped since the rain, and basically you then just let some line out. As you can see, I'm letting line out from the reel and the float's coming up, and then all you do is just move the reel gently until you achieve the right height for the float. Hopefully that's in shot, and that's showing you what I want. Now in actual fact, I want to be a little bit deeper than that, so what I'm going to do, and this is what I was explaining before, fine-tuning the rig. Now I know this rig is probably, as I just said, 6 inches over depth, but I'm going to make this probably more like a foot over depth. Just move that up. I'll just tighten that shot up a little bit. Not recommended to use your teeth, you could break them. Right, so what we're trying to achieve is, instead of having the float like this and the line going straight down and then trying to tighten up, that's never going to work. So when you tighten up, the line pulls this way like that, and you end up with this diagonal line angle here. And what I found is, if you go about just over a float or so over depth, that actually copes with the drag better. And of course, why are we doing this in the first place? Why don't we just either fish with a waggler or fish with a feeder or a bomb? Well, normally the reason I'd be doing this is because the weather conditions are probably not good for the waggler. You could, as I say, just throw a bomb out to where you're fishing and carry on with that, or of course a feeder. But there's a couple of reasons why you might want to use this, and the first one is that bite-wise, if you're getting bites on this, remember the tip would be somewhat thinner than this when I'm using it. If you're fishing for things like roach or smaller fish, which give you not these pull-around bites that you get normally, this will go under and you'll see it and you can hit it quickly. Still works obviously great on carp and everything else, so they'll just take it under and that's it. But that's one of the benefits of it. And the second benefit, of course, is that some people just like to watch the float. And so this is kind of an intermediate measure between fishing with a waggler and fishing with a feeder. You don't have to do it, you could do either or. Of course, if the waggler can't cope with conditions, and I have shown you how to slow the waggler down in the past to counteract things like the undertow caused by wind. And as I say, you could always go to a feeder if you want to. But if it's really windy, your tip could be bouncing up and down and doing all this sort of thing from waves, whereas this one, when it goes under, you'll see it. It's entirely up to you if you use it. It's, as I say, not used that much anymore. It was a thing not so long ago where people would use the old Polaris or Locslide floats, but you don't need to. And this one gives you the benefit of being able to ascertain any drop-offs, as I just explained to you. Okay, so I'm going to now change this tip back to the original one, and I'm going to start fishing. A couple of bits of sweet corn on, and let's see how we go. So here we go then, first cast. Got a couple of bits of sweet corn on. Just rod under the water, allow the line to sink. May take a while because it's not that bad conditions today. Allow the line back up and then just trim the float using the bail arm like that. And we're ready to go. just so you can see the normal sort of conditions where I'll be using this kind of rig. Here's a few clips from the other day where it was howling a gale and the undertow was something fierce going from right to left. And it actually worked really well. Now on that day I couldn't loose feed, so what I did was to attach a small cage feeder and fed through that. It keeps your feeding really accurate, and of course, as I say, if you're trying to use a catapult and it's going all over the place, that's not really the idea. So you can use a cage feeder on this, no problem whatsoever. Just unclip the bomb and away you go. Anyway, just have a quick look at these few fish I caught just to show you what the conditions were like. Dehooked himself, look. Slightly bigger. Not much, but slightly. But what is happening is that we're catching plenty. And in these conditions, that's great. Probably about a pound, this one. About the same size again, but definitely putting a few together. Oh yeah, he's a nice thick goldfish type fish. Bit like a crucian, but not quite. Whoops. You will find on a windy day that that undertow and the wind will probably pull against your float. And as I said, I've got a reasonably thick insert into the top of the Waggler at the moment, but you may find that the float gets pulled down a fraction. That's fine. All you do is just adjust it a little bit by moving the bail arm backwards or forwards to accommodate. If your float gets pulled under, that's no good, so go to a thicker tip. And you can go to a level where you're just not using an insert waggler anymore, you can just use a straight through waggler. But if that's still pulling through under, then the conditions are probably exactly wrong for using anything other than a feeder or a bomb. Just so we've covered all the bases, I'm just going to clip on a feeder. As I said, we're using a link swivel or a clip swivel on here to enable us to do that. And I'm just going to use this small sized one. You can use a bigger one if you want to, but for these sort of shallower lakes, for this particular one, I like that particular feeder there. Remember what I said before about making sure your twizzle boom comes down further than the feeder? Remember, feeders come down further than do ledger weights. The other thing to bear in mind is, as you can see here, I've just added on this little shot. This is a number 4 shot, it's a Stotz. And the sole idea of that is, as you can see, when I'm trying to change bait, the whole thing doesn't end up down at the float. It's about 45 centimetres, maybe a bit less away from the swivel here. Not critical at all. Okay, I'll just put some ground bait on and we'll get casted out, and I can show you another little wrinkle that you need to be aware of. So I had to put the lid on the ground bait because of the rain. Right, so there's the feeder. Now when you cast out, the idea, I'm actually casting to a line clip at the moment, purely and simply so that this camera down here gets the thing entering the water. Wouldn't necessarily say that using a line clip was always the best idea for this, because if you get a bite from a carp, you may well end up with the whole thing going into the drink. As I've said before, I actually use this MAP reel with an automatic clip system, so it does actually release for me, but I don't think there's any other reels out there, except maybe the Witchwood ones that do it, and these have just been discontinued as well. So anyway, the plan is, you cast out, not too hard, you don't want this to go in with a big splash, just feather it down, and then put it in exactly the same way as before. What you don't want to be doing is casting out and pulling back, because that will just empty the feeder. And there we go. Well, no sooner put that feeder in than I got a bite. Not a big fish, but just goes to show changing things around can often make a difference. Here he is, look. I don't know, I'm guessing at 3/4 pound or so, but very welcome. Very fit though. He don't want to give up, does he? Right, you can see probably better on this one. If you look at the feeder now, because of the length of the tail I've got on this, and I'm not saying you have to have this length of tail, but it works for me today, the feeder has dropped over the side of the net, which means it's not going to get all tangled up inside the net with the fish. It's a small point, but it all helps. So as you can see, there's not a great deal of wind today, and what there is going that way, so where I'm fishing is actually pretty calm. There's a little bit of an undertow caused by the wind pushing the surface water around, but nothing too difficult at all. And that's why this reasonably thin insert on the top of the waggler can cope. As I said earlier on, if it gets much stronger than that and the waggler starts to pull under, don't be afraid to go to a thicker tip or even a really thick tip. There is a limit, of course, like I said before, and at some point you may just have to consider going to the feeder. But this is really enjoyable, just watching the float tip going down. So just while we're on the subject of the Waggler float itself, as I said at the start, this is a 3.5 AAA Waggler. It's made out of reed, it's homemade, and it's got interchangeable tips. But that's not the reason I'm using it. The reason I'm using it instead of a loaded float is that I want the buoyancy. If you use a loaded float, which is only going to take an extra, I don't know, BB of weight or something before it gets taken under, you don't get the resistance to the current. So that's why I always use these unloaded floats for this purpose. And the rain came down again, just what I need. Just move you in a second, save you getting wet. All right, see if we can get back to fishing. Ah dear, oh dear. Well, coming down quite heavy now. Just what you need, isn't it? Still, it's got to be better than working, hasn't it? Okay, so slight change of plans then. Not for the fishing, for the cameras. I've had to put the rag over the camcorder down there, the one that was doing the bit with the float, the close-ups, and I've had to bring the GoPro in under the umbrella. If it stays like this, we should be able to continue filming, but as the wind gets up and the GoPro gets wet, then I might have a problem. And yes, you might say GoPros are waterproof, but they're not when you've got radio-controlled microphones and spare batteries hanging on the bottom of them. So hopefully we'll be able to continue. Another little small one. At least the rain's stopped at the moment. Well, not quite stopped, but more or less anyway. Okay, getting 1 or 2 bites now anyway. Hate fishing under umbrellas. It's always makes things awkward. There we go. Bit smaller than the last one, but completely pristine condition. Look, lovely. When the fish start to arrive in your swim, just like when you're fishing with a waggler or when you're fishing with a tip rod, feeder rod, you're going to get false indications or line bites. You're going to get little dips on the waggler, or you're going to get little knocks on the tip, and it's exactly the same with this. If it goes like that, that's usually a line bite. Okay, so don't be striking every little dib and dither. Make sure it's gone under properly, and then you should actually have the fish on. Oh, we're off to the races with this one, I think. He's kind of, I'm not sure what he's doing, he's kind of kiting over to the left somehow. Kind of just leaning against me, not really pulling. Not sure how big he is. He's better than we've had so far. Oh well, he's taking line now. Strange fight. Well, he's off to the right. Let's just see if we can turn him around a bit. He's got some weight behind him. I don't think he's quite done yet, but he's definitely not fighting like all the other ones do. See how we go. Beautiful fish. Definitely a carp. Oh no! What can you do? GoPro, stop recording. That was a good bite. It's not a very big fish. Having one of those days, aren't I? Still, fish is a fish, and I'm enjoying my day out. Oh, probably about the same size as the others, I think. Good bite though. Just goes to show you can actually catch pretty small fish. I know this is a carp and they can, even at this size, they can pull a rod in or certainly pull a reel backwards, but you know, small fish. You can catch all sizes on this kind of rig. He'll do. About a pound or so, I suppose. There we go, look. Another liner, still nearly struck. Struck that time, got it. Oh dear. This is small. I don't care. Been a nice day. Well, the weather's been awful, but the fishing's been pleasant. They've pretty much all been about the same sort of size today, this sort of, I don't know, 3/4 of a pound to a pound mark. And I've actually caught this in its cheek, look. Well, that'd be typical, wouldn't it? I was just about to pack up. I was turning everything off and this happened. And I didn't even catch the bite for you or much of the fight because I was too busy getting this thing in. Decent fish. Come on, fish. Gonna come in without messing me about this time? No, of course you're not. Why did I think that it would? Oops. Okay. Get in the net. Oh, they're crying out loud. Goes in head first and then, well. And then jumps out again. Right, let's see if we can get him in this time. Come on, in that net, that's it, finally. Got the old leg assist going again. He's a good fish though. Oh yes, that's a lumping ton. Where's the hook on? Hook's just on the outside of his mouth. Let's get rid of that. And I think I'm going to weigh this one. Right, 0. And this one is 15 pounds 13. So it's 14 pounds 12 because it's 15 ounces for the scales. But isn't this a cracking fish? Oh, you'd think it would weigh more than that, but there we go. Look at that. Great stuff. Whew. Hard work that. Right. So there we are then, folks. The rain's been making it a bit difficult off and on today, but I have to say I've really enjoyed this. Hopefully it's enough for you to have a go at this float ledgering lark. As I say, you don't need to have the specialist floats to be able to do it in shallow waters, but what we will do is we'll use one of those Polaris floats to fish in deep waters. That's when they do come into their own for me. I can still do it with a slider, but you know, I'll show you how to do a Polaris float anyway, just so that you can see the difference. I'm probably going to have to call it quits fairly soon because there's a great big cloud coming up over there and I can actually see the rain coming out of it. I'm going to try and miss that. Hopefully I can get packed up in time. Anyway, as always, hope you enjoyed it. If you did, click the button. If you want to subscribe, you can do that too. And until the next time, bye for now.